Domination on Sundays begins with listening to these guys on Thursdays. Nearly 40 years of fantasy football experience between them. It's showtime. The 515 Fantasy Football Podcast with your hosts, Brian Eikenberry and Andy Hall.
Hello and welcome to the Maiden Voyage, episode 1 of the 515 Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Hall. My co-host is and always will be Mr. Brian Eikenberry.
What's going on, man?
It's great to have you, my man.
New podcast, new season of football, new season of fantasy football, drafts coming up. The breeze smells great.
Well, that all depends on whether or not you washed that hooded sweatshirt after all of those multiple uses last season. But for me, I'm just excited to be talking football again. And you're right, this is a very important weekend. Draft season is upon us for all of us fantasy footballers, no matter how many leagues we happen to be in. How many leagues are you in, by the way, this year?
I'm going to be in 3 this year. I usually try and keep it just to 2, but that third work league kind of snuck in there, which there's not going to be too much invested interest and time into that one. So we'll try and make 3 work this year. How about you?
A half dozen for me.
Wow.
What can I say, man? This is, I'm a total junkie when it comes to this sort of thing. So when we're in the off season, I'm itching, I'm scratching. I need my meds.
You need to start up a fantasy football arena league or something.
God, wouldn't that be nice? Brian and I, between the two of us, coming up on 40 years of experience in fantasy football, so we know what we're talking about. I'm entering my 23rd season of fantasy excellence, and Brian, you've been at this for, I think this is your 17th season, you were telling me.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you start rolling back the time and you start counting it up, you just go, holy cow, and it's 17 years later, here we are.
And Brian is a veteran in more ways than one, not just a veteran of fantasy football and a mastermind when it comes to the game we love, but Brian is also a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and we thank you for your service, sir.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. It's nice to know I'm loved somewhere, right?
Well, I don't have a claim to fame like that. I guess I just have my wife, and I've got the 2 boys and a third on the way, and it's a girl this time around. So
awesome. Well, congratulations.
That won't arrive until November, thankfully. So we'll get into part of the season before we have to be sidetracked by sleepless nights and baby poop and puke and all of that.
That's okay. Maybe I'll beat you on some of the pick'ems or something that time.
Yeah.
Take advantage, seize the opportunity.
Now, I did not say that I'd be dropping the ball in any way whatsoever when it comes to these things. But anyway, it's great to be back for another season of fantasy football. And I'm super excited, Brian. I started the Facebook page last season, the 515 fantasy football page on Facebook, just as a way to sort of get my ideas out there. And, less than a full season under my belt on that Facebook page. We're a hair under 100 followers already. Feel free, for those listening that have not followed already, to check us out online at facebook.com/515fantasy, and that is the numbers 515. You can find Brian and myself on all kinds of social networks, Facebook, Twitter, all of that good stuff. Brian, where are you at on Twitter, by the way?
I am on Twitter at cyber_suicide. That tag has been with me since 1998 playing video games. So if you see a cyber suicide anywhere in the video game or social media realm, that's me.
There you have it. I am at 515 Fantasy in case you want to find me on Twitter, and mentioned the Facebook page already. So how this is going to work, at least for the preseason, Brian, before we get into regular season action, and we're spending most of our time doing game recaps and then what we think is going to happen the next week in fantasy action. What we're doing here in the preseason is catching you up on all of the headlines off the top. I want to begin with perhaps the biggest story to come out of preseason thus far, and that's the loss of Jordy Nelson, wide receiver of the Green Bay Packers, who's out for the season with an ACL injury. Pretty significant when you consider that Jordy put up some huge numbers and has several seasons for these Packers. They're going to have to pick up that slack somewhere else in this offense.
Well, yeah, that was one thing that was really surprising to me, is that I didn't realize that Jordy Nelson had like 250, 300 more yards than Randall Cobb did. That I didn't even realize that. And then when the injury came out, I was kind of pouring through the numbers. One man's injury is another man's opportunity. Kind of pouring through, and I was just like, holy cow, I didn't realize that. He was the number one wide receiver on there. So it was just pretty astounding.
Yeah, 98 catches for Jordy in 2014. Just over 1,500 yards and 13 touchdowns. So, yeah, he was out in front of Randall Cobb by quite a margin. And we're going to have a conversation a little later on in the show regarding who we think might pick up the most of that slack in that Green Bay Packers offense, and that'll come in handy for when you're doing your drafts in the upcoming days and weekends. Another of the more significant injuries we've seen thus far in the preseason, Brian, is Kelvin Benjamin, second-year wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers, also out with an ACL injury. And in that offense, I think that hurts that Carolina offense a lot more than it helps, in terms of Green Bay. They've got all these guys that can step right in. I'm not sure you could say the same for Carolina, unfortunately.
Yeah, that Cam's got to be crying in his cereal over that one. Just because that is such a huge part of their offense. Carolina had slowly been starting to put the offensive pieces together around Cam Newton to let him try and blossom into what he needs to be to make that a championship team. And when you have a guy of his size and speed and that chemistry that him and Cam were working on and doing, that is just tragedy to the whole team. And now you have to think, some people liked using Cam Newton because he could do it in a variety of ways on the field. And now that also comes into play is, do I really want any Panthers now at this point?
Yeah, there aren't too many to be targeting, that's for sure, and Cam Newton is unfortunately one of them. As you said, he can do it more than one way. He can also beat you with his feet, and he might be forced to do more of that this season by virtue of the fact that he's lost his main pass catcher in Kelvin Benjamin, who caught 73 passes last season for just over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns in his rookie season. The guy's a physical stud. I hate to see him go away for the 2015 season, but he's got to get on the mend. Moving on here real quickly, rookie wide receiver out of Miami, Davonte Parker, is a guy that a lot of people are targeting in drafts this year. And unfortunately, there's some new news that's out there that says that they're uncertain whether or not Mr. Parker will be ready for Week 1 action. He's, of course, expected back at some point early in the season after being activated from the active PUP list last week. But they're saying that Week 1 is no guarantee for Davonte Parker.
So this might just be a little bit of a sidetrack here, but it kind of plays into the whole bigger picture. Think back 3 years ago when the CBA was kind of being hashed out. A big part of that was the off-season program. I remember as soon as the draft was over, everybody reported there was these mandatory mini camps going on, and a big part of the CBA was removing that off-season burden. The players wanted the off-season to be themselves, and their big bargaining chip was, we're going to stay healthy, we're going to stay working out on our own. The owners said, no, we don't trust you. You're our investment. We don't want you injured by something stupid. Look at the amount of hamstrings and, ACLs isn't that, you can't quite put it in that same category, but look at the injuries that are piling up in the preseason, and it is going to kill some teams and really break some of them.
Yeah, I think, there's always been the argument that the preseason should be much shorter than the 4 games plus the Hall of Fame game. I don't know how I feel about it. I guess if I'm an NFL owner / coaching staff, I want as many reps for those young guys as possible to see who I might be able to slash for one, and then another make that 53-man roster and actually contribute to the team throughout the course of a season. They might need all of that time, but in terms of keeping these players healthy, it's not a great idea to have so much action. We're talking a quarter of the NFL regular season is all just preseason when these games really mean nothing, and especially to these veterans who are getting hurt. It's really unfortunate to see.
Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know. We always talk about it, then you see names like Aaron Rodgers come out in a press conference and blatantly saying a meaningless game. And that was the second game. So, I think there's that torn relationship of you don't want to do all these preseason games, but you kind of have to. And the owners like their money coming in. And, the preseason isn't really for the starters. It's for the other 30 people on the roster who aren't starters trying to make that roster and who's going to the practice squad. So it's just kind of one of them tough things. You never know which way it's going to fall.
Some more news items of note recently include the Broncos made their decision at the kicker spot. Now, some would consider it sacrilege to talk kickers in fantasy football, but kickers' lives matter where I come from. Brandon Mcmanus will be your starting kicker for Denver this season. A lot of folks thought maybe Connor Barth had the inside on that job. They released Connor Barth, who then quickly got picked up by the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So there's some news there in the kicker world. How do you feel about kickers, Brian?
I'm going on a lim and saying kickers will win you games. In our league, at the end of one of them, which I commish, I'm a pretty big stat junkie, and I like to break everything down in numbers for everybody so they can't argue. And when we look at the amount of games that's decided, because we do fractional points, we get down to the nitty-gritty. When we broke it all down, there were probably 12 games in our league that were decided by 5 or less points. And that's a 50-yard field goal. So if you're thinking kickers don't matter and you just pick one, and you're picking a guy who kicks 2 field goals and 2 extra points a game, he's getting you 8 points. But if my guy kicks 3 field goals, a 50 and a 40, and a 30 and 2 extra points, I've won that game. So I'm actually a pretty big nerd when it comes to kickers, and IDPs especially, is looking for those extra 3 or 4 points. If that kicker averages 3 or 4 more points, that is a win or a loss.
Well, you've just won this former kicker's heart over, I'll tell you that much right now. Those that don't know, I did once compete in college football as a kicker, and I can still put it through from 45 and in pretty consistently. So there you have it. Moving on, some St. Louis Rams news. This is pretty significant. Todd Gurley took part in team drills on Tuesday. Now, he had sort of worked on occasion off the field, but nothing in terms of team drills up until this week, and it's appearing more and more likely that he'll be ready for week 1. But my feeling is they're perfectly happy with what Trey Mason brings to the table as the starting running back, at least for the time being, and they'll work Todd Gurley in as slowly as they need to as a rookie.
Yeah, they were kind of digging into that a little bit. I was kind of following this. Gurley's somebody I might target a little bit later in the draft, just as kind of a roll in the dice. You never know with rookies, but there's always 2 rookie running backs that always make a huge fantasy impact. The Rams are being very cautious. They're not letting him do those pass protection drills. They're really kind of keeping it safe. They don't want him turning. They don't want him really grinding in. So we'll see how it goes, but I think they're going to ease him in. I would say week 3 or 4, he's doing the work. Just nice and easy, letting him get comfortable, making sure he's comfortable with cutting and really digging in.
Yeah, not in just redraft leagues, Brian, but I think, definitely the dynasty format where you're taking rookies for a number of years and owning those contracts. I'm in one league where we draft rookies only in a certain draft, and we own those rookies for 3 years. And Todd Gurley should be one of the first 2 or 3 guys off the board, at least in my opinion. So hopefully they're smart about how they utilize Todd Gurley at least early on, and then get him fully integrated into that St. Louis offense, where I think he can thrive like Steven Jackson did not too long ago. Moving on, Steelers have signed quarterback Michael Vick to a 1-year contract. Does this mean anything to you fantasy-wise, Brian?
No, it doesn't. Not fantasy-wise. Big Ben's the show, obviously. We all know that. There's no way he's competing. The thing I liked seeing was Vic saying he knows his role, he knows he's the backup, and that's what he's going to be. If anything, just if you're a Steelers fan, that's got to make you feel good, because you know you have a competent backup who can still throw the ball, he can still make the team work. Fantasy value, 0. Sports fan, yeah, and that holds value to me.
I don't like the fact that we're agreeing this much early on, Brian. This isn't working.
All right,
for me.
I'm just going to sit on the other side of the couch. Maybe that'll help.
Moving on, Chris Ivory of the New York Jets has been looking pretty decent this preseason thus far, and in a recent interview said that the coaching staff is looking to get him the rock a lot more, and not just in the running game, but also the passing game. And, it's funny because one of the quotes was, "Yeah, check me out. I actually got hands. I can catch the ball." I think that's good news for Chris Ivory on a very run-heavy offense.
Well, and see, here's the thing that gets me excited about that is typically I have a no Jets clause in my draft day manifesto where I really try and stay away from them. But this is a guy who's getting a new shot with a new coaching staff, and sometimes that's all they need. So if you can grab him in like the 9th round, you've already got your starting roster put together. Everybody's overlooking the Jets because we know the Jets. Somebody snags him up, that could pay off huge dividends, and that's something that could win you the championship. So when you've got those bye weeks coming through, he turns out to be a stud, you're going to look brilliant because you've seen that coming. So, hey, you heard it here first. I think he's worth taking a risk on. Not as one of your first 2, but he's definitely worth it. Taking a look at and considering late mid draft right in there somewhere.
You know what? For the first time tonight, you and I are going to disagree. Chris Ivory is a great running back, too, this season. And I'll say that because not only is he going to get the volume this season, he's going to be involved in the passing game, but now they brought in Brandon Marshall, and I think him with Eric Decker, and it doesn't matter who's throwing them the ball, but I actually like Ryan Fitzpatrick a lot more than I like Geno Smith or anybody else for that matter in that offense. And, I mean, they've got a pretty stout offensive line there. I'm not concerned at all about Chris Ivory finding room to run, and he certainly did at times last season. Now you add in to the equation a Brandon Marshall, and I think Chris Ivory is a very sneaky good running back 2 option for your fantasy squad, and a guy that quite frankly could help you win some championships this season.
Well, the gauntlet has been thrown down then, I guess. We're it. That's it. We're friends no more. The disagreements start.
All right, let's do this. You didn't care about Michael Vick at all. Does Reggie Wayne signing with the New England Patriots on a 1-year deal, does that mean anything to you from a fantasy perspective?
Yes. This one I was excited about. I've been waiting to see who pulls the trigger, and I think that the Patriots knew he was going to get snatched up, so I think they grabbed him. Reggie Wayne going to any other team, I probably don't care. But Tom Brady's there. He's going to throw the ball 40 times a game. Somebody's going to catch it. And I think this is just me kind of looking into my crystal ball and asking the great Jambi, is I think he's going to have some pretty good numbers. He's not a wide receiver 1. He's not a wide receiver 2. But I think he's a solid bye week option. I think he is your flex option because he's still got hands. He doesn't drop passes. He will catch the ball. He may not be able to run far or fast anymore, but he can still catch the ball. And that's all that matters to Tom Brady because Tom Brady will put it where it needs to be put.
All right, again, I'll disagree. I'm going to say Reggie Wayne is another year older, He's competing with guys who are much younger and faster than he is on for looks in that New England offense. Granted, he caught 64 balls last season from Andrew Luck, 779 yards, only 2 touchdowns. And in 2013, guess how many touchdowns Reggie Wayne had?
Handful?
2.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't really like him as anything more than throwing a dart at a dartboard. I think you could probably do better to pick up somebody in the later rounds that's got a lot more upside, more youth. And I'll throw some names out a little bit later on in the show. Still to come with Brian and myself on the 515 Fantasy Podcast, we are going to do a 3-round mock draft between the two of us based on a 12-team standard league. Stick around for that. The stock market segment is also on the way. Whose stock is up, whose is down. And we're going to do a little pop quiz here in just a little bit as well. But first, Brian, some training camp battles of note, and I kind of want to get your take on what you think of a few of these, including the Dallas Cowboys running back situation. Joseph Randall, Darren McFadden, who you got?
This one's tough, and I can smell the disagreement and disappointment in the air. I'm gonna go with McFadden here. So I'm kind of rolling the dice. Randall hasn't. To me, he's not one of those guys. And this is kind of the Chris Ivory storyline, kind of in the Cowboys camp, is McFadden's going to the Cowboys. He's getting everything he wants. We thought McFadden was the greatest thing since sliced bread 3 years ago, but he was with the Raiders. Didn't work out. He's getting a new shot in Dallas with a stud line. I think he's going to be the guy after a couple of weeks, and I don't think it's going to be any doubt. So the people who are drafting Randall early are going to be extremely disappointed when McFadden shows his real colors behind a good line that's blocking for him, and he's going to be the back that he was drafted to be.
So, first of all, I will agree with you 100%. Dallas's offensive line, one of the best in the league in terms of run blocking, and those guys definitely have that going for them. Where I disagree is that I think this is a full-blown committee, and I don't think one guy has a whole lot of advantage over another. And I don't like the value of Joseph Randall right now where he's going as opposed to looking at Darren McFadden's ADP, and I think they're pretty similar in terms of what they're going to get for opportunity in this Dallas offense. And quite frankly, this could be one of those situations too where, let's say Darren McFadden has a good week, they just keep rolling with him until he sucks, and then they throw in Joseph Randall again. So it's tough to say. I liked what I saw from Joseph Randall in very limited action last season. Obviously, DeMarco Murray was just unbelievable, and they weren't going to take him out of the game. But when Randall was given opportunities, a lot of his touchdown runs were long runs. So this guy's kind of a home run hitter. I don't see McFadden as a home run hitter like Randall is. So I like that upside. But I do think that both guys are going to get opportunities, and thus I don't think there's a clear winner here in terms of taking advantage of a decent ADP where you're going to draft them.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the reality of the NFL directly clashes with the fantasy football world, and it's just one of those things where come draft day, you're staring down the barrel and you want to take him. Are you going to roll the dice? And you know what? This is what makes fantasy football so fun, because taking risks or playing it safe. How do you usually go? Let's sidetrack for a second. Do you usually risk it or do you play safe?
I let players fall to me. I don't like reaching for hardly anybody. I look at everybody's ADP going into a draft, and for example here, we'll just look at Joseph Randall's. I'm looking at several mock drafts that have been sort of counted here, and I see that he's on average going at the tail end of the 3rd round. I don't like him there, but if let's say I'm drafting near the end of the 4th round and he still hasn't been taken by anybody, I'll jump right on him. So that's the kind of draft I like to compose. Is I'm not reaching for anybody. I see where guys' values are, and I either agree with them or disagree with them. In the case of Joseph Randall, I completely disagree with where his ADP is right now.
Totally agree.
Yeah. All right, well, that settles that, kind of. The Atlanta backfield is another one that's intriguing only because we haven't seen either of the two backs that most people are talking about in any preseason action because they've both been dinged up. Devonte Freeman is a second-round back, a smaller guy. He not much size to him, not too much shiftiness either, judging from what we saw last season, but he seems to be the favorite to win this job by virtue of the fact that he's a year in the league as opposed to Tevin Coleman, who's the rookie. Now, what he's got going for him is this current coaching regime who just, came into Atlanta this season. They're brand new. This is their guy as opposed to Devonte Freeman, whom they did not draft. So maybe there's an argument to be made there that Tevin Coleman will be given the shot eventually.
Well, and I think he could get it just out of sheer accident. I'm not a big fan of Atlanta's running game at all. You mentioned the new coaching staff. Their offensive line is terrible. So from a fantasy perspective, I'm kind of out on Atlanta running backs. I'm not even going to glance at them. They're not even on my draft boards. Not even wasting ink printing out papers. It's just not happening for me. I don't know what's going to happen because it's going to be bad for everybody. I think it's going to be a committee. That's kind of my gut. That's usually how Atlanta deals with it. They typically, before in years past, they had, your first and second down, you're the third down guy. Jaquiz Rogers was always coming in. Just the way it went. And it's just toxic to your team. It's bad news because it's unreliable and there's just nothing you can do about it, especially with a bad line. It's one of the things, they might get 20 touches a game, but when they're averaging 2 yards a carry, that does not help you at all.
You and I agree completely on the Atlantic backfield and in terms of their offensive line as well. There was a time last season where I think they took like a third tight end and made him a tackle. It was just awful. Completely agreed with you on the Atlanta situation. I'm not planning on drafting either one of them either, but if I was, forced to, I would probably take Devonte Freeman if he fell to me. I think, with rookie running backs, the trick is, can they pass protect? And most of the time the answer right off the bat is no, which is why most rookie running backs aren't worth the hype. And I wish people would understand that about rookie running backs. Don't take rookie running backs expecting them to, own every single, they're not everybody can be Adrian Peterson. And a big reason for that is they're not going to be given the opportunity because they can't pass protect yet. They have to learn that. Anyway, we're moving on, not wasting any more time on Atlanta's backfield. The only other training camp battle I really want to touch on here is the Buffalo quarterback situation. They do have some intriguing young weapons there in Buffalo. Sammy Watkins just happens to be one of them. I want to hear your gut on what you think of the Matt Castle, Tyrod Taylor, etc. quarterback battle.
So this is kind of where you just have to trust in the youth and come to terms and completely forget that Matt Castle is a serviceable NFL quarterback. You just have to. It's not there. It's not happening. You just got to move on from it. I remember way back when Matt Castle came out, he saved the season, and then he bounced around to mediocrity and going. And to me, that's a team just trying to appease people at that point. You got to go with the youth at some point.
And that youth is not E.J. Manuel. Notice I didn't even mention him.
Heartbreak again, man. It just I had Sammy Watkins last year, and I will be passing on Sammy Watkins. It's another one of those things where I'm on a consistency kick right now in my fantasy, first 4 picks. I'm not rolling the dice any sooner than that. I'm not reaching. Sammy Watkins will fall out of that area, but that's like betting your money on boxcars every time you're playing craps. It's not going to hit 20 times, but that one time he'll have 40 points. It's not going to happen.
Sure. All right, well, that does it for the significant training camp battles anyway. Let's move on to a segment I like to call Pop Quiz. What I'm going to do is ask questions here, Brian, get your take on them, and then give you what the right answer is. So, No, I'm just kidding. With Jordy Nelson out for the season, which Packer stands to benefit the most from a fantasy perspective? What's your take?
Well, I can't see how we would disagree. Devante Adams is set up to be an absolute stud here. He is going to come in and, he's going to be the new number 2. Even though the Packers have said, we don't know who it's going to be, we don't know this, but when you have Randall Cobb saying this is his breakout year, he's going to do this, he's going to do it. When the defenses have no choice. You've got Eddie Lacy, you've got Aaron Rodgers, you've got Randall Cobb. You've got 3 huge playmakers you need to worry about. How do you account for that fourth one? And that's why the Packers are just such studs on offense, because there's so many weapons. Devonte Adams is absolutely going to slip through the cracks. He's going to be a stud. I don't think there's anybody out there who is going to be able to compete with him for that number 2 position. When you've already got the support of the number 1, it's going to be that way.
The only other argument besides Adams that I could make for an answer to this question would be Eddie Lacy. I think Eddie Lacy could actually become a bigger factor in the passing game by virtue of the fact that Aaron just has like 1A and 1B now between Cobb and Adams. Montgomery, I hear, might be the third receiver, not Jeff Janis, but that remains to be seen. I think Eddie Lacy is one guy who stands to benefit quite a bit from the loss of Jordy Nelson. I also think that tight end Richard Rodgers is somebody that folks should look at later in drafts.
Yeah, whoever it is, they're going to score points. You just have to be the one to pick him at this point. And, for me, if it's your round 12, 13, your roster's looking like a stud, it's not going to hurt to start snatching up Packers wide receivers just in case it doesn't work out.
Question number 2, since I think we agree on that. Texans running back Arian Foster expected to miss a significant amount of time with a pretty nasty groin injury. Which Houston running back will score the most fantasy points this season, in your opinion?
Who is even back there besides Arian Foster at this point?
Alfred Blue is going to be the guy for now, but they also have Jonathan Grimes back there.
To me, I don't know. At this point, you kind of got to go with the coaching staff and go with Blue. I don't see that as any fantasy value. It's going to be tough. Where are you going to waste a pick at? Is that one of those things where after week 1 you make a free agency, you burn your waiver wire on one of them if they get 85 yards and a touchdown? Is that the point? But I see that as just a total committee, and whoever's running good in warm-ups that day is going to get the start. I'm honestly surprised Ray Rice isn't placed somewhere yet. It's got to happen, right? It has to.
Not necessarily.
To me, I said he'd be gone at the 3rd week of preseason. He's going to sign a contract somewhere. But I correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't even seen him take a visit anywhere yet.
No, and nobody wants to entertain him either. So I think you're wrong. I think Ray Rice is done, and I think he was done the minute I saw that video. So the correct answer to question number 2, by the way, is Arian Foster. Doesn't matter how many weeks it takes to get him back. There are reports that if things go well, and they have so far, he could be back by the end of September. And this isn't the first time Arian Foster has missed games, come back, and been an absolute killer. He could come back and help you win championships. Let's say he gets back sometime between weeks 4 and 8. I mean, if he's only missing a quarter to a half of the regular season, Alfred Blue sure isn't going to make up what Arian Foster can do in that amount of time. So my answer is Arian Foster for question 2.
Yeah, I guess. Trick question, I guess. So if you make it out of your bye weeks in like 5 and you're good on running backs at that point, I could totally burn it and pick him up and let him sit there and collect some dust for a few weeks.
That's right. Question number 3. Andrew Luck We know he spreads the love in that Indianapolis offense, and there's talk that this team has all the makings to be one of the highest scoring NFL teams of all time. How do you see his passing touchdowns getting distributed this season? He's got some new weapons there in Indy.
Well, it's going to be, obviously, it was the T.Y. Hilton show last year. It's going to be even bigger this year. I think Andrew Luck is really going to have his explosion to be next year's number 1 or number 2 quarterback. And in terms of fantasy value, I think he's going to put up, he's got a good shot at putting up the 4,500, pushing 40 touchdowns. I really do. Just the team is committed to him, and they're committed to building that high-powered, unstoppable offense again. They were really close last year, and they're going to do it this year. There's going to be a lot of Colts receivers taken off the board very quick, in my opinion. It's going to be like a Packers scenario where a lot of Packers receivers go and a lot of Colts receivers are going to go.
And don't forget the tight ends there in Indianapolis. Both Fleener and Allen both scored 8 touchdowns last season, a total of 16. And when Luck threw a total of 40 last season, that's damn near half of his touchdowns going to the tight end position. So that's something to keep in mind coming into this season. But between T.Y. Hilton and Andre Johnson, and they've got all this young stable of wide receiver studs to be, I think Indy's set up for a very long time now. And I would not be surprised at all if Andrew Luck throws 45 or 50 touchdowns this season. And he's also got Frank Gore in the backfield who can catch a ball or two as well.
Yeah, and something like that, you also have to look at the character of the people there. Like you said, you've got some veterans and you've got some strong young leadership. And from what we can tell on the outside, everybody's keeping their nose clean and everybody's doing what they're supposed to do except for the owner. So I think we're pretty good at this point.
Question number 4, now that Kelvin Benjamin is out for the year, how many passing touchdowns do you think Cam Newton will end up with?
15 or 20?
He had 18 last season.
Yeah, I'll take my 20 away then and just go with 15. He'll be lucky to get one a game.
That's what I think too.
Yeah, if we don't go by wins and losses in the fantasy world, but there's nobody to catch the ball. There is nobody to catch the ball. And you have to have receivers. You have to have people who can get separation. You have to have people who can get off the line, and you have to have them catch the ball. Cam Newton will have his most risky season this year. And I say risky in the terms of injury, because he's going to try and do a lot himself, and he will run. And, we've seen it in the preseason game that they're defining some rules about quarterbacks getting hit and which hits are legal, and it's favoring the defensive players again now. So, he takes a lot of snaps out of the shotgun. It's going to get risky. It's going to get dicey, and he's going to try and do too much on his own. I wouldn't be surprised if his interceptions are higher than his touchdowns.
They probably will be. My guess, he's probably in store for 13 to 14 touchdown passes this season. I think that's a pretty... that might even be on the high end. He might run 5 to 8 touchdowns if he can stay healthy throughout the course of the season. But, this is just not a good start for the Carolina offense, as we alluded to earlier in the show. Brian, before we get to our 3-round mock draft, a real quick stock market look at some of the players who are on the up and some are on the down. For me, on the up are obviously Packers pass catchers. We talked about that a little bit earlier. But going back to the Carolina Panthers, I do think there is at least some upside to a young guy like Devin Funchess in that offense.
Yeah, I had Funchess on my rising board. He was brought in for a reason. He was picked for a reason. And it's because he can catch the ball. So there's that. that's good. On the other side is, if you've got a guy like that who's fresh, now he's going to get double teamed. When Kelvin Benjamin should have been the one getting the double and sometimes even the triple, now it's going to be on this poor guy. I'm sure he's up for the task, but in terms of fantasy value, I'll take a shot on him at some point, but it's not worth really investing a starting pick in.
A couple of other guys I have in the up category would be Latavius Murray, who's looked pretty good thus far in the preseason for the Oakland Raiders. Granted, not one of the greatest offensive lines in the NFL, but this guy's got enough shift and size in him, a rare combination, that I think that he could actually be a steal in the middle rounds.
So here's one that I kind of want to talk about. Is everyone's high on Amir Abdullah right now? And I am taking a reality check back off of that. So while he's rising, it's tough for me just because his stocks might be rising, but Joique Bell's also in town, and he's not going anywhere anytime soon. So that's one he's rising, but I have a little bit of caution with that one.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about the Detroit backfield for just a second, I do, for the record, completely agree with you that the hype is way overblown on Amir Abdullah for being a rookie running back. Joique Bell, still there, as you said, although on the mend, but I think he'll be back in time to start game 1 of the regular season. He's also your Thunder guy. Theo Riddick is also still on the team. Theo Riddick, last I checked, could catch balls out of the backfield and be a third down back type. So, I mean, Amir Abdullah, for as good as he looked on that one run that got everybody all going on him, I'm not a firm believer that he is one of those guys that you should be reaching for. And for that matter, I mentioned rookie draft earlier in terms of dynasty leagues where you're doing auction and things like that. If you're doing a rookie draft, Amir Abdullah, he might not even be in the top 10 picks if you're drafting with guys that know what they're doing.
Well, and that's kind of the reality of the situation is, think about the big picture and think about what's there. Plus, on the rising, you also have to think about what other offensive weapons there, and in terms of that, it's a passing offense there. But one other guy, this might seem a little tricky here, but someone who had a bad year last year, Jimmy Graham. Look at where he's gone. A lot of draft boards look at last year's stats. Well, if they're looking at last year's stats, Jimmy Graham's kind of low. But he's in Seattle, and he's going to get a lot of touchdowns. He's not going to get the yards necessarily, but he's going to get them touchdowns. And depending on how your league scores, this guy could put up huge touchdowns with little yards.
Well, I'll tell you, that worries me as a Marshawn Lynch owner in a lot of dynasty leagues that I'm in. I own Marshawn Lynch, and I don't want to see his guaranteed carries inside the 10-yard line go to Jimmy Graham more often than not. So I am a bit concerned about that, and if you're planning on taking a swing at Jimmy Graham, you better do it early. I've seen Gronkowski go in the first round in some drafts, and there's an argument for that. Jimmy Graham typically goes to middle or late second round, I think, is where I've seen him the most. So it just depends on how you feel about spending that high a draft pick on a tight end, and whether or not you think it'll be worth it week to week in terms of does he help you win that position by that much more. So I only have Brandon Cooks left on my up list. He's a guy that a lot of people are already talking about in New Orleans anyway. As far as downs go, Brian, who do you got?
Well, where do I start? There's lots of people. I kind of tend to read into the press a little bit, and when they're over talking somebody who shouldn't be, that's my signal is this guy's doing even worse.
Too much hype.
Yeah, too much hype is definitely a bad thing. And my first one I look at is Doug Martin. Everyone's so high on this guy right now. Oh, he's back. He's in the right system now. He's back. He's flashy. He's looking great. And I'm just like, who are you trying to kid? Like, I understand you're trying to pump everybody up, but I'm sorry. Doug Martin just keeps going down, down, down for me.
Well, obviously, I don't think he's got anybody there in Tampa that's going to seriously compete with him for carries. The question is whether or not you think Tampa will be running the ball a lot this season at all. I think they're going to be behind in a lot of games, and they certainly got the weapons at wide receiver to warrant throwing the ball more. Even with a Jameis Winston, a young quarterback there, plus, Jameis can run the ball too. So I guess there's even less reason to give the ball to Doug Martin. Whether or not he'll ever be the player he was back in, 2012 when he had that monster rookie year,
Yeah.
I guarantee you that will never happen again. But people, you're right. People are going too crazy with Doug Martin. They need to temper their expectations. There is no doubt about that.
What do you think about Andre Ellington? Since we're on the running back kick, to me, he's a guy who's going down as well. He's got a young stud behind him who's kind of nipping at his heels, and with his injury risk, you know what? I think it's his job to lose, and I think he's going to lose it pretty quick.
Well, there was a lot of hype on him last season. I think it's gone by the wayside. When you average only 3.3 yards per carry as he did last season, that's, people tend to sort of turn away and go, well, he's just another one of these mid-tier running backs, and he's not gonna help you win any fantasy championships. I'll take him in the right spot, don't get me wrong, but I don't see Andre Ellington being a difference maker for anybody on their fantasy team.
Yeah, that, and you can even dip in it. We kind of mentioned this a little bit earlier. Sammy Watkins stock. It was never high to begin with, but there was a lot of upside to him. But now it's breaking your heart, but it's going right back down. It's tough. It's not necessarily in the down section of the stock market. It's not necessarily that player. It can also be that player's environment. And I think Sammy Watkins is that person who is just a victim of his environment, and that's why his stock for me is going down.
You are listening to the 515 Fantasy Football Podcast, Episode 1, our Maiden Voyage. I'm Andy Hall. Brian Eikenberry is my co-host, and we're going to wrap up this week's podcast with a 3-round mock draft. A lot of folks are doing their drafts this weekend. A lot of them are snake draft. Many of them I find are 12-team leagues, so we'll base this draft on 12 teams, standard scoring, non-PPR. Let's just keep it simple. I'm curious as to who your number 1 overall is, Brian, so I'm going to bestow you with the first overall pick in the first round.
All right. Well, so
pressure's on.
Yeah, I don't want to have to explain myself at every pick, but it's probably going to have to, so we don't start yelling at each other and make it all uncomfortable for our listeners, But if I'm number 1 and I'm looking at the big board and I'm looking at guaranteed and the biggest upside, and it breaks my heart to have to pick this person, but it's Adrian Peterson. He is going to be such a stud, and he is going to just destroy people. It is going to be sick. As a Barry Sanders fan and love of my life that he is, Adrian Peterson is going to destroy everybody this year.
Listen, you don't have to, unless you were to throw out the name Adam Vinatieri as your number 1 overall, we're not going to disagree here. So Adrian Peterson as the number 1 pick is perfectly fine, and as the number 2, I'm more than happy to allow Eddie Lacy to follow me, so that's who I'm taking at number 2 is Eddie Lacy.
Eddie Lacy, huh? Well, if you're going to take Lacy, that's fine, because I'm going to take Le'Veon Bell.
And that's who I would have taken with the second pick if I didn't take Lacy. But I love Le'Veon Bell, despite the fact that he's going to be out automatically those first 2 games. The guy's a killer. Nobody was more explosive than he was last season, particularly in the final 3 quarters of the season. Le'Veon Bell was magnificent, won a lot of people championships. So
yeah.
I like that pick a lot.
Huge stud. I'll take that 2-game pass. It's not a problem. You don't win in the first 2 weeks anyways.
All right, pick number 4, I'm going to stick with running back here, and I'm going to go with Marshawn Lynch. I mentioned earlier how I'm a little worried that Jimmy Graham is going to take some looks away from him, but Lynch always gets his, and I think they learned a big lesson in that Super Bowl last year. You give the ball to Lynch when you're down near the goal line, and they're going to do that. There's no doubt about it. Nobody's been more consistent at the running back position, and let's be frank, the running back position it's pretty volatile in the fantasy world. You look at the top 10 running backs year to year to year, only 2 or 3 of them generally make an appearance year after year after year, and Lynch is one of those people. So I like that kind of consistency. That's where I'm putting him at number 4.
All right, well, I'm going to throw you a curveball. I'm going to be the first one to act here, and I'm going with Antonio Brown at pick number 5. That's it for me on running backs as far as that top tier, that top 4. Antonio Brown, there's no doubt about it. It's his show. He's the man. He's too fast. He's too good at separation. He's a physical receiver, and he knows how to get the job done. And he's got the trust of his quarterback, and that's enough for me to launch him into that stratosphere.
So you take Brown as your number 1 overall wide receiver. My number 2 is Dez Bryant. That's who I take at the 6th overall pick is Dez.
Dirty Dez. You're not worried about him getting mad and hitting somebody, huh?
There's always a risk of that. I took Steve Smith in one of my leagues last year too, so I like to live dangerously.
Well played. All right, well, I didn't want to have to do this right off the bat, but I'm going to go with Demerius Thomas at pick number 7. Again, it's the Broncos are the Broncos this year. Who knows? Peyton Manning's 1 year older. Their line is a little bit worse. A little bit. I mean, they lost 3 starters, so it's going to hurt. But Demerius Thomas is still Demerius Thomas. And when they run that screen, he gets his yards and he breaks them big.
Whoever the 8th pick happens to be here would be entirely thrilled to have Jamal Charles fall to him this far. So Jamal Charles is the 8th pick.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome, but I think some of that offensive weaponry is going to go to Macklin. So maybe
I
Kansas
disagree.
City. Really?
No, listen, Alex Smith, he couldn't find a wide receiver last year if his life depended on. He threw 0 touchdowns to wide receivers last year. In fact, this recent, I think it was just last weekend, that was the first touchdown Alex Smith had thrown to a wide receiver since week 2 of last year's preseason. I think that was the stat. So, no, I like Macklin. He's a great receiver. I don't think they're going to be looking for him. I think they know that Charles is their weapon, and Charles falling to pick number 8 is a pretty big deal.
That and being able to take DeMarco Murray at pick number 9, like I have just done, is going to be pretty awesome. Injury concern as always with DeMarco Murray, but I think he's going to benefit in Philly, and he's going to do all right.
I think pick 10, that's got to go to Rob Gronkowski. Here's a case where Gronk's going in the first round, near the tail end, granted, but he's going to give you that much more of an advantage, a positional advantage week to week, as you look up and down your roster and your opponent's roster. Nobody's going to be able to stick with Gronk at that tight end position. It gives you an incredible advantage. So Gronk is the 10 pick.
You take Gronk, I take Julio Jones at 11. I think the way they're built, we talked about the offensive line, we talked about the backfield. The wide receivers are healthy. They're going to have a good year. Matt Ryan's coming off of his bad year, so it's time for revenge. Ball's going to be in the air 50 times a game. The wide receivers do not get interceptions on their points. The wide receivers are going to have a huge year in Atlanta.
At the turn here, I think this is where probably going to have to take Jeremy Hill at that 12 pick and then team him up with the consensus number 1 quarterback for a lot of people, and that is Andrew Luck.
You're pulling a quarterback off already, huh?
Yeah, Andrew Luck's typically going in the early second round, and I think for the dividends he could pay at the end of the season, that's a good spot for him.
Yeah, unless it's week 17 or week 16 at the end of the season and you lose your championship round on Andrew Luck's shoulders. That burns.
Somebody's a little bitter. I can hear it. All right, go ahead. The 11th pick in that second round. So
I'm going to run with ODB. You know what? He deserved to come off the board in the first round, but there were just too many other studs out there. Second round for him is still good. He deserves to be in 1, but he had to go somewhere.
Can't believe Randall Cobb has fallen this far. He's the next pick.
I am going to have to bump over to Matt Forte.
Yeah, he's still there.
This is fun. I don't get to pick this many times.
No, I know. That's why it is fun, actually, because it's like, oh, great. Now what do I do? Okay, for my next pick, I'm going to go... This is an upside pick here, but C.J. Anderson at the next pick.
I'm down on that guy, just because of the offensive line woes there in Denver. So to make myself feel better about your bad pick, I'm going to take Rodgers. I think if you can get Rodgers in the second round coming back, that's huge. Especially if you're drafted on a 12-team league. If you're drafted in the 6, 7, 8 range, and you can get Rodgers on the way back, not too shabby.
Listen, man, what's funny is that C.J. Anderson, I would agree with you that I'm not completely sold on him. I'm certainly not sold on him where his ADP is currently at, which is the 8th pick of the first round. I'm really not a fan of that at all. So I had a chance to grab him with the 5th pick in the second round. I'm all over that. So. All right, so you're going Aaron Rodgers, huh? Okay.
Yes,
well,
sir.
We'll come back here, and I think this is probably a good time to take Megatron. So we'll put Megatron there at the 6 in the second round.
Oh, decisions. So for this particular one, man, so if you're going to take a receiver, I feel like I need to take one, but this is one of those receivers where it kind of breaks your heart. He's tough to trust after last year, and his quarterback situation is still the same. A.J. Green.
Yeah. That's about where he's going in most drafts, right where you're taking him. I'm going to go running back with my next pick, and my next pick is a guy who caught 100 balls last season. If you're in a PPR league, it's a big deal. We're drafting non-PPR here, but Justin Forsett is my next pick.
That's a good pick. I love the guy. His all-purpose yards are through the roof. So, like you said, depending on how your league drafts, he's not a bad pick at all anywhere, honestly. I think he's a guy who's got a huge upside. Another guy who should have gone way earlier. So if you can get this guy in the second round, coming all the way back, third to the last pick, Lesean McCoy.
Yep, and it's just a matter of where is he going to fall in these drafts. And I think that, you got to look at it from this perspective. Buffalo, granted, hasn't figured out their quarterback situation yet. They're kind of a mess. They have a mediocre offensive line, not great, not terrible. They're certainly not the Philadelphia offense that McCoy has been running with for the past couple of years, particularly when you're talking about that Chip Kelly style of play. This is more of a grinded out, slow, trudging Buffalo offense. And I think that actually suits McCoy to a certain extent. So I think people are down on McCoy when they really shouldn't be. He's going to get a ton of volume this year, so that's a good pick. I like that. Let's see. Where do I go next? Man.
It's tough when you have to pick like this, isn't it?
Yeah, I have a couple of choices here, and I'm just trying to choose between them. I think I have to go wide receiver on this next pick. So, Alshon Jeffrey's still on the board. Alshon Jeffrey's got to be my pick here.
Oh, thank goodness. I was hoping that you were not going to take mine. I want T.Y. Hilton coming back. What a stud.
You got Hilton there, and you got another pick to start the third round. This will be our final round here.
Final round. Man, I'm really looking at some upside. I'm looking, you know what? I'm going to pull the trigger, and this is kind of risky. It's something I typically don't do, but the guy is just an athletic freak, a stud, and he's got a good wide receiver there to go with him. I am going to take Mike Evans.
That's a good pick right there. I like that. Team up T.Y. Hilton and Mike Evans. Nobody's going to argue with that, especially since this is the same team. If you look at our mock draft, that took Adrian Peterson at the 1 pick. So you got Peterson.
This is a pretty stud team right here.
Peterson, Hilton, Evans, not bad. I am also going to go wide receiver here, and I am going to I'm going to take Brandon Cooks. This is one of those sort of unproven stud type of picks. I think Cooks has what it takes. This might be a little early for him. I don't think it's too big a reach, but Brandon Cooks has the opportunity to be a stud in that New Orleans offense.
I agree. He is someone that can sneak his way, and you can get a good value pick, and kind of like this guy. So based off of depending on how you get your information, I think this is the right time in round 3 to be that sneaky guy and take Devante Adams. He's going to catch the ball. He's going to get yards. He's going to get touchdowns. I think this is the right time and right place for him.
It might be a little early for my blood. I think I would have waited probably another round before looking at Adams. But, you got to swing and hope you hit it out of the park sometimes. So that's a good one to take a risk on considering that offense, no question. Back to running back here for my next pick. And the next back on my board is Frank Gore in that offense. Here's a guy who stays healthy, despite his advancing age. He's going to get the opportunity, and Indy's going to score a ton of points. Look what Ahmad Bradshaw did on those bulky knees of his last season. So I like Gore here in the 3rd round.
Absolutely. I think you're in a good position, and I'll take the guy who filled his shoes, and I'll go with Carlos Hyde.
Bit of a risk there considering San Francisco offense doesn't look to be one of the higher scoring teams this year, but
no, it is. But here's one of them situations where you got a clear cut number 1, and he's going to get 25 touches a game because there's not very big, speedy receivers there that can really get the job done, and I think he's got a good shot if you're getting him in the 3rd round. Depending, so for like this team, I guess I kind of did it off of this team. This team has Antonio Brown and A.J. Green. So going with that running back of Carlos Hyde, I think he's one of the better ones that's still available out there because go ahead anyways.
My next pick is a guy who fits the description of what you just described, except he's a lot better than Carlos Hyde, and that's Lamar Miller.
Yeah. We'll just leave the Dolphins at that. But I won't get there yet. I'm still bitter. So I think we can start looking at quarterbacks again. It's one of them things where from a fantasy perspective, I think Russell Wilson is a good pull in that top from a fantasy point perspective with the rushing yards, the rushing touchdowns, with his passing stats, with those touchdowns come in from Jimmy Graham. I think Russell Wilson's a good pick.
Interesting. Wilson's your number 3 quarterback. I have him ranked 4, just so you know, so we're not too far off. My next pick is going back to receiver, and I think Jordan Matthews has to be my pick here. This is a value pick. Jordan Matthews in that Philadelphia offense. Jeremy Maclin's gone.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter who's throwing the ball. Jordan Matthews is going to come down with it.
I agree. See, now I'm going to start getting myself in trouble because I'm kind of looking down the list here.
We got 2 more picks each in this round, and then we'll call it good for this week's podcast.
All right. I'm going to throw myself out there a little bit, and I think this is a guy who's not going to be Gronk, but he's going to be pretty close. And for this one, I'm going to go with Jimmy Graham just because I think he's going to be a touchdown monster this year. I think that's there, and it's going to happen big time.
Yeah, listen, this is right about the spot where you'd want to take Jimmy Graham. So that's a perfectly fine pick where you're at right there. In fact, I think guys will probably be reaching earlier for Jimmy Graham than where you're getting him right here. So that's pretty good value. Okay, I only got 2 picks left here. And I think at least one of them has to be Deandre Hopkins, and I'm going to go ahead and take a swing at Deandre here, my next pick.
Will you swing at him? Because I am going to take Golden Tate.
Yeah, I mean, Deandre is the clear-cut number 1 in that Houston receiving core. I don't care who's throwing him the ball. Actually, scratch that. I'm glad it's going to be Brian Hoyer because he's a lot better than the other options there in Houston, including Ryan Mallett, who's horrible. But Golden Tate is a guy who, benefits from the fact that Calvin Johnson draws double coverage everywhere he goes. And you're right. I mean, all it's going to take is opportunity, and I think Tate's going to get that this year. So that's a good pick. My very last pick is going to be Mr. Peyton Manning.
Mr.
Yeah, I think if I don't grab him at this spot here in the third round, I'm probably not going to get him on the way back. So
nope, absolutely not.
So there you go. There is our 3-round mock draft going into a very mock draft heavy weekend for a lot of folks.
Yep, it's going to be a jamming weekend. You're stacked this weekend. I'm stacked this weekend. We're going to have lots to talk about next week. Lots of crashes, booms, and bangs, I got a feeling.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, Brian, for a maiden voyage. I look forward to doing it again. The 515 Fantasy Podcast be posted on Thursdays every single week all the way through the season, and then we'll see what we want to do in the playoffs. Maybe we'll do some special editions. But you can always check us out on the Facebook page, facebook.com/515fantasy. I am at 515fantasy on Twitter, and Brian, I can't remember your Twitter handle.
It's at cyber_suicide.
For Brian Eikenberry, I'm Andy Hall. Thanks for listening to episode 1 of 515 Fantasy Podcast. Catch you next time.
Bye.